everybody out there. Welcome to this wonderful webinar that we've got today featuring Nick Disabato. How's it going, Nick?
Doing great. How are you?
Doing good, doing good. Well, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah. Happy to be here.
Just want to give you a brief, awesome. Yeah, we're happy to have you. And just to give you like a really quick intro, just to let everybody know who you are. Nick is a designer and writer from Chicago. They run draft.nu, a small consultancy for online stores and software businesses, helping numbers go up in a way that is hopefully not gross. They've written 3 books. A 4th is coming out shortly, and they are both funnier and more interesting than all other designers.
It's true. Only facts. Yeah, sorry about the slight delay, y'all.
Yeah.
Cool.
Also, before we get going, if anybody has any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat while Nick gives their presentation, and we'll save some Q&A for the end. So,
cool.
Nick, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ian. Appreciate the time today. Appreciate everybody showing up for this. As mentioned, I'm Nick Disabato. I'm a designer and writer from the city of Chicago. Thank you also to Keith and Ness for setting this up. I know they're not here. Maybe they're here. I don't know. Hi. Thank you to you for coming and taking some time out of your workday to chat about things. I'm tremendously excited to get started on this. So as mentioned, we're a design consultancy. This is a picture of us. The clients hire us to understand their customers, run experiments based on those understandings, and generally, as I mentioned, make the numbers go up in a way that is hopefully not gross, that doesn't manipulate people, that actually meets their needs, that creates a union between business goals and customer needs, right? We've been helping businesses since 2012. Some people think we are very good at what we do. And it all starts kind of with research. We're going to talk a little bit about what research means. People think it's a bad word. You might be quitting off the webinar right now. I'm terribly sorry. But ultimately, we think design is rooted in research. We think design is an evidence-based process by listening to your customers, right? We think you can't just like come up with inspiration around design. You have to actually pay attention to people and who they are and what they want to do. And in that listening process, we understand what customers say and what they do, which is often 2 different things. We'll talk a little bit about what that means. And it kind of presupposes an important thing, which is that we don't actually know what our customers know yet. We have our business and we're sometimes blinded by the realities of the business or why we made the things that we made, or we assume that the customer is actually similar to us in a very like deep sense. And I see this happening with my e-commerce work a lot, where people make their, initial product and it eventually grows beyond kind of their initial tribe, and then they don't actually know who it is that they're selling to, right? We need to trust our customers that they're going to tell us what they need, and we need to believe that they're not misleading us. Like the idea in the tech industry that, people would have invented a faster horse or something like that, this very like Steve Jobs idea of genius. Yeah, that happens, but it's the exception and not the rule. And it's still involved in that process of listening. You just weren't privy to it because Apple is really secretive, right? So we need to take action on how customers are actually guiding us on a day-to-day basis, right? So we get a lot of common objections to the belief that we don't know what our customers know. And we'll go through a couple of them so we can just kind of get in the right mindset first. And people think, our products are amazing. We know what we're doing. Our customers trust us. This is what's the Steve Jobs maxim, right? What got you here won't get to the next stage of your business. If you're plateauing in growth or you're uncertain of who your actual customer is, that's probably why you're on this call. You don't know that the decisions you make are necessarily going to have a positive impact unless you can act with a little bit more confidence and clarity in what you're doing. And if your business became successful enough that you're in like a period of really significant growth right now, then you definitely do not know what you're doing, right? You don't know who your customer is. The other objection we hear is, but I talk to customers all the time. And maybe you're the one person in this entire audience who does. In fact, proactively reach out to customers and get them on the phone. If not, then you talk to your loudest customers all the time. You talk to a specific kind of customer all the time. You talk to people who already bought from you all the time and not the people who didn't buy from you, right? You talk to customers maybe with problems with their order all the time. You don't talk to all of your customers. You talk to as few customers as you possibly can, and then you get back to running your business, right? And then, I came up with this project after seeing an unmet need in the market. Therefore, I know what's best in the customer. And you may be some sort of informed, egoistic genius about this. But if you're hiring me, know that I don't know what's best for the customer either, right? I only know what's best for one living being in the world coming into my job every day, and that is basil, the world's greatest organism. Your customers are not basil. I don't know what's best for any other human in my life, no matter how close they are to me. Only basil, who hates being picked up more than anything, right? People know what's best for themselves. Intuition around customer needs got you to this point, and that gave you safety and comfort, and now you're trying to seek further growth and you don't really know where to go with it. Or you exist in a period of global crisis like we all do, and you want some clarity on how to move and some way to actually sleep a little bit better at night. So when you reach this point, your ego becomes your business's biggest enemy, more than Amazon, more than Apple, more than any competitor that you directly have, right? You know too much, period. So according to my friend Philip Morgan, that's the mindset, right? Like, you don't know the customer. What is actually holding people back from research? So according to my friend Philip Morgan here, he's another guy who he talks a lot about business positioning. You might have heard him before, especially if you're in like a certain stripe of software development. The 5 things holding people back from actually performing the research that they need to do to grow their business are: we don't really understand what research is. Like, I can say research and just like tumbleweed goes across in your head. We lack any formal training in research, or we think that formal training is necessary. And let me tell you, my graduate school degree was lovely, but I probably actually didn't need it to do my job right. And I know that sounds really crazy to say, but I think it's the honest truth. You can learn how to research very easily. We're intimidated by the idea of it, partly because of that lack of understanding. We don't see any examples in our peer group, right? We do what our friends do. We're hive people. We're very much herd animals. And we see few examples from our peers of really good research, largely because research isn't shipped. The results of research is shipped, right? You don't look at all the research that went into the iPhone, or the prototypes. You look at the iPhone, right? And then I'm just going to quote Philip here wholesale, because this paragraph he wrote in this post about research wrecked me. He wrote, quote, "We practice an unlicensed profession, and so there's little incentive for us to raise our game beyond what improvisation, gut feel, past experience, best practices, and a dash of confidence can achieve," right? And I think that's kind of wild, right? There's a ton of information around research out there. You can Google for it. You can find good UX consultancies that are writing about it. And really, it's just a process of gathering evidence. We find some problems, and then we ask ourselves how we might go about solving them. That's it. That's all we do, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about what the process looks like, because business lives or dies on process. You can just follow this step by step and go through things and hopefully gain a clearer understanding of how to actually do all this research, right? We want to create a durable, repeatable process that reliably generates profit. So the first thing is you want to find where your problems are. You want to find what's actually leaking revenue and causing churn and doing all the things that we don't want to have happen in our business. And you can find that, like, okay, find all the problems. Well, Nick, there's probably plenty of problems. Let's get a little bit more specific about what that means. Earlier, I talked a little bit about what customers say and what customers do. What customers do is essentially quantitative research. That can involve looking at your analytics platforms or your metrics like Mixpanel or GA or something like that to understand where people are going, when people are bouncing, where people are converting, what they're reading, what they're trying to understand. It can be heat and scroll maps, where you, again, like, take a look at a heat map and you see, where are people scrolling? Where are people bouncing? What are people beelining for? What are people ignoring, right? Are those things good? Do they indicate conversion in some capacity? Can we throw event listeners on certain elements and then go back and take a look at analytics and try and understand what's going on here, right? We can take a look at behavior recordings to understand where people are rage clicking or being frustrated with the usability of our product. If you run a software product and you don't run behavior recordings to see where people are bouncing or churning, I think that's an enormous missed opportunity. And I know that it's a little bit tedious to go through behavior recordings in batch, and I can give an hour-long talk on how to make that simpler, but ultimately, it's a form of quantitative research you can try and understand a little bit better. One thing I didn't mention here also is what's called a heuristic evaluation. So if you run a software business, create a usability checklist of basic things you would expect the product to actually fulfill, and make sure that your product is fulfilling those expectations across platforms, across devices, and make it as easy and usable for people as humanly possible. That's a form of quantitative research, right? Qualitative research is more about people's stories, what motivates them to buy in a deeper, more emotional sense, right? And it's getting a sense of their stories. And this is something that as nerds, I think we are really like missing. It feels like we don't even have like a limb to actually talk about this, right? And it's something that I, as a very left-brained, very masculine person, like try to understand and reckon with as part of UX design over really the past 17 years of my career. It involves talking to people or listening, right? So you call people on the phone, take interviews, take notes, make sure you're asking the right questions around all these things, and don't just lead the customer into something that fits your own preconceived narrative, but being very open-ended with a lot of tell me more about that, or periods of silence where you can just help people lead to the actual source of truth and then learn to just very humbly respond to things. Usability tests, where you have a script of tasks that you have people try to complete. So maybe take a look at what the overall first impressions of the store or the SaaS app look like on the homepage. Take a look at pricing, take a look at what holds you back from buying, what you would do to price compare, talk through your narrative as you're going through all of this, and then attempt to sign up for a plan with a dummy credit card, for example. Usability tests are really basic ways to uncover, yes, usability errors, but also key objections that would hold somebody back from actually closing a sale that you might not have thought about because you're not surveying non-buyers quite so much. And then surveys, I view them as a form of qualitative research, mostly because when I'm doing like e-commerce work, for example, I'm running post-purchase surveys that have like free text fields, right? And I might be gathering all of those into specific categories, but ultimately I'm also mining them to gain a clearer insight into what's causing people to purchase or not purchase, or what held them back, or who needed to approve the work, or whatever have you, right? So post-purchase survey happens, again, right after purchase, right after conversion, and it might be a pop-up or an email after that says, tell us a little more about what led you to buy from us today and what you're hoping to get out of our product and what a home run would look like. They can be usually only a few questions. I only do 1 or 2 questions. Maybe it's, where did you find us today? Or what was the last thing that held you back before purchasing? Those are good questions for post-purchase surveys. Another good one would be, for example, deep dive surveys, where every 6 months to a year, you can email your entire customer base and ask them questions about, well, overall demographics, but also what kind of value they're getting out of the product, how they found out about the product, and what ways you can do to improve. And that involves sort of a blend of quantitative and quantitative insight, right? You can understand a little bit more carefully what people are saying from, free-form comment fields, but also who they are and what they do, and then you can turn that into more deep quantitative insight to target maybe even your ads, or maybe even personalize your site or your store a little bit more further, right? Another thing that's missing from qualitative research, I think, that I would include in here, I just completely blanked on it. I would say it would be, so if you have a large information architecture, if you're running a store, you have a lot of things to categorize, something like a card sort might be appropriate, where you categorize a lot of different navigation items or a lot of different product features into specific buckets underneath what's called a card. So I can show you card sorting if you guys want during the Q&A, if you're very curious about it. But I would qualify that almost as qualitative research because it's a very subjective, sort of narrative-based sort of play activity that helps you kind of understand a little bit more about what the customer needs and how to create an information architecture that makes more sense for people. So in terms of the impact of all of these things, I mean, the outcomes for each of these can overlap and be really, really expansive, right? I don't really hem myself into any specific box when I'm trying to think about these. But with quantitative research, usually it's addressing usability, functionality, onboarding questions, navigation, again, IA concerns, maybe the validation of the design or a new product feature writ large. Maybe you're rolling out a redesign, or maybe you're rolling out a major new feature and you want to validate it ahead of time or test it with people and make sure that it fits holistically into the rest of your product. Quantitative research is amazing for that sort of thing. Qualitative research is probably more for copy and more for voice and tone. So if you don't have a consistent voice and tone guide with your brand, you probably should, because that helps resonate with people and get people to sign up. You think about companies like Wufoo or MailChimp or gosh, I'm blanking on a couple of really good ones. Basecamp's a great example. They all have very specific voice and tone in their copy that help really drive conversion and help make customers feel seen and appreciated. So that can also take the form of just headlines, busting objections, updating your branding, maybe even the kind of emails that you send out, what touch points you're doing with it, what you're saying in them, how you're saying them, getting them to be read, getting them to be open, and getting them to be acted on. I also think that, to backtrack a little bit, another good one for qualitative, reviews. If you have a reviews app or you're on Trustpilot or something like that, mining positive reviews for headline content is one of the more powerful things that you can do in an afternoon, and I strongly recommend doing it. Sorry for the backtrack. So once you found your revenue leakers, next thing you do is make some informed decisions, right? So you've gathered some information, right? You found some things that are busted. Like, for example, everybody is beelining to pricing and then everybody is bouncing when they go to pricing. Or people are not clicking the main call to action on the homepage. They're only going to navigation, or they're not scrolling on a page that they should be scrolling on. Or when people tell us that they want a specific thing out of their product, it challenged our assumptions of what the product actually was for and being used for, right? Those are things that can challenge the business, and they can challenge primary metrics like revenue, conversion rate, churn, all the things that we care about, right? So you look at that basket of information that you've gathered from whatever means it is, those things that end up challenging your business, and you try and come up with some ideas for how to change things. This process is called synthesis, and the output for it can take the form of either one-off changes, I fixed a bug, I made a usability improvement, I planned out a new feature, or it can be an experiment, which is on something that might be a little bit more of a gray area, something more emotional, like, oh, I changed the headline, oh, I changed the layout, or I removed these elements, I reworked the navigation, things that you're not so sure about. Anytime you're not certain that there will be an improvement to the customer's experience, generally speaking, you should be running an experiment if you can. You get enough statistically significant traffic, right? And synthesis is this process. The term for turning research into design decisions is called synthesis, and it's something that sounds like dark magic that only a warlock named Nick Disabato can perform, but that is not actually the case. Synthesis follows a 3-step process, and it's real simple. So I'm going to walk through it here. First, we try and isolate what happened. So, okay, well, we found the revenue leakers. Something happened. So, for example, people are not scrolling on the homepage and understanding our value proposition, right? That can be what happened. And we found it through heat and scroll maps in some capacity, and then we validated it through behavior recordings, maybe even through usability tests, and that's what we know is happening. And we're a little thrown off by it because we spent a lot of time writing about our value proposition, and we want people to actually be focusing on it, right? Number 2 is, why do we think it happened? Answer that question. Now, there could be many answers to why we think nobody actually looked at our value proposition. The easiest one would be everyone beeline to log in and we were sending our value proposition to converted users and not segmenting people appropriately. Well, fine. Maybe bucket the usability test a little bit differently or the heat maps a little bit differently and filter people. But if it's more crunchy and interesting, maybe your headline is really powerful, or maybe people aren't ready to buy your product, or maybe people have absolutely no idea what it is you sell because you use a lot of developer jargon. Maybe people are just going to the about page, or maybe people were referred in through third parties, and you were talked about by word of mouth, and you figured it out that way. And so they didn't even really need to look at your value proposition. And so the narrative is a little bit out of your control in that case, right? You don't know which one of these is true necessarily, so maybe further research is required. You want to keep going back between these two steps until you get a clear singular number two. So I just came up with a bunch of different examples for why people aren't scrolling on this fake page that I just invented, right? Now, you can go and validate that with more behavior recordings and see, oh, a lot of people are clicking on login. Well, okay, maybe they're not. Maybe people are clicking on pricing, they're going elsewhere. Maybe even heat maps, it's not supporting this idea that people aren't going for the value proposition. Maybe something is lighting up in the navigation really significantly. So, okay, now we validated it and we realize, okay, well, it's probably something that people don't understand. Maybe you go into analytics and see a high amount of refers, right? Coming in from, I don't know, Reddit or Stack Overflow or Hacker News or something like that. And people are clicking over to your site, and you understand that people have already qualified themselves in or out, and they already strongly know your product. Well, if they know your product, then what should we do about it? Maybe the answer is to pare back your homepage. Maybe it's to personalize that homepage. So if there's a cookie already thrown for somebody, you know they're a converted customer, you don't really need to give them a really big, enormous homepage and keep selling your product, which saves bandwidth and helps usability for your converted customers and also stops wasting their time. It can also personalize the page for specific refer agents. So if they're coming in from Hacker News, you can welcome them and show them to a specific landing page. If they're coming in and it's from one of specific refer agents, or you need to provide some sort of like alternative to other products based on specific search queries, you can customize the messaging that way, right? Go more deep about where people are coming from and what you think their brains are at when they're actually trying to buy your product, right? And that's essentially what synthesis is. So what happened? Nobody is scrolling. Why do we think it happened? People are already learning enough about their products so that we can actually make a decision beforehand. What should we do about it? The answer is either simplify and retrench and give up that narrative. No wrong answers. You could do that, right? Or you can control the narrative a little bit more strongly, right? You can attempt to, you know, rework your homepage, make it so that they don't have to scroll before you get to the point. Don't use jargon, use something that catches people, work with a copywriter, and then run an A/B test on it, right? So that's that process of synthesis for one fake invented problem. And everybody has problems in their business. You can come up with a billion more of these, right? But ultimately, I think that when you follow this process at a very high level, you keep peeling away the reasoning and make your site a lot more demystified and practical. I find that a lot of the work that we do at Draft is just a lot of common sense stuff. And it just involves asking the team a lot of questions. And people are open and receptive to asking those questions as long as they can believe with humility that by the end point, we're going to get to a position of clarity with how the customer behaves. I don't think that everyone is secretly some sort of black box that we have to attempt to mind read in some capacity. Usually the answer is a lot simpler and cleaner than we may necessarily believe. A lot of purchasing decisions are made often based on the recommendations of others or based on emotional impulse. And if we can go off of that, you know, I know there's exceptions to all that, but if we can go off of that and surrender a little bit to what this process looks like, then I think we can do a lot better in trying to come up with revenue generating design decisions. Because if you want to run A/B tests or make one-off fixes or do optimization in any capacity, it's only as good as your ability to generate ideas. And this helps generate lots and lots of really solid ideas. And I think that can be really, really, really powerful. Once you've generated those ideas, you need to figure out what to do first. Because usually when I'm going through and doing this, I'm coming up with dozens of opportunities for improving things. And that can be fix a typo or redesign your pricing structure wholesale, right? And so one of those is very easy to do. You can do it in 5 minutes. The other one is going to be a bit more of an undertaking, and it's going to involve kind of more consultative work. So you need a framework for prioritizing this That's kind of your port in the storm, right? You want to look back on this and say, okay, we did all of this fairly. And some things are what I will call high risk, high reward, right? Like, oh, redoing your entire pricing structure. Yeah, that's high risk, high reward, right? You want to make sure you're getting it right, so you're actually doing this properly. But really, when you're doing this sort of prioritization, I think there's an incentive to deprioritize the hard stuff and just get all the easy stuff done fast. And most of the time, that won't actually move the needle meaningfully for you. So as a result, when we do prioritization, we go by 3 different criteria. And if you go to this page here, you can take a look at how we actually do it. The first is feasibility. So from an executional standpoint, how hard is the change to roll out? Score from 1 to 10. And you can have other people vote on this. You can have your developers at the table. It's a subjective art, as it were, right? The second is, what do we think the potential business impact is going to be? And at Draft, we have a whole set of metrics that we go through to try and understand what will actually help. Like changing an element or fixing a typo in your footer is not going to help quite as much as changing something that's load-bearing, like your pricing or your main headline, right? So those would be a 10, others wouldn't be. And then the third is, how much does it actually jibe with your existing business's strategy? And for us, because we're a consultancy, we try and define what that strategy is at the outset of the engagement. We talk a little bit about how to do that in this blog post here as well. Add those up, you get a score from 1 to 30, just like it's a Zagat rating, and then you sort in descending order and start fixing, right? And then, you know, roll out fixes, build experiments in order of that prioritization. And that's it. That's the whole process that we follow, right? And we keep doing this until eventually doing it doesn't yield as many rewards going forward. And we at Draft have used this process. Oh, that's a static PDF. We've generated at a conservative estimate over 10 million in annual recurring revenue for our clients over the past couple of years. And I think that when you go through a process like this and this kind of research, when you keep doing that, you end up changing the culture in some capacity. I know that sounds really crazy to think about, but people tend to be very in their heads about what the business is and who their customers are. And if you start this process of listening, you'll find people starting to ask deeper questions about why you're actually showing up and what it is you're doing. Every day I wake up and go to work assuming that I know nothing. And I think that is a show of strength and humility, in fact. I think that design is the process of understanding a little bit more at the end of the day than you did at the beginning. And so I want to invite that deeper consideration in your own daily processes and try to understand more clearly why it is you're actually showing up to make the changes that you're making in your product's UX, in your business's structure, and in the way that you communicate to your customers. And so you can act a little bit more intentionally and with greater focus. If you think that I am a loner who's crazy about all of this, there's no shortage of resources out there for you. I'm not even listing my own books here. Like these were, you know, I stand on the shoulders of giants. I think that these books are astonishing and extremely, extremely useful. Some of them are over 20 years old and there's still evergreen content. Like interviewing people and talking to people is probably not going to change as a practice for a very, very long time. We have remote work. We have easy recruitment tools now. It's never been easier to get your customers on the phone. Use Calendly to get them on the phone. Use Zoom to get on a phone call. And use Audio Hijack to record that call. And then I can't believe I found a really good use for artificial intelligence, but use Whisper to transcribe it for free and then read it, right? Like that's easy. Some of these books predate me as a human, and I still think that they're useful. So take a look at those resources and hopefully, okay, let's say now you're like, oh my God, Nick D, this is amazing. I'm going to go and practice design all the time. Well, great, lovely. You may have to get the team on board with this, right? Like, remember when I talked about culture change and the kinds of things that people might be doing to kind of go against design? Remember when I spent the whole 5 to 10 minutes beginning of this talk talking about mindset, right? There's still a lot of people who might say they want design, but they don't actually practice what I'm talking about as design, which is, again, focused exclusively on customer research. There may be people who just want to go off and do whatever they want to do for whatever reason, right? So either way, you've got to get some people on board about it, right? Now, ultimately, there are three things that I have personally found I can do to improve design support in an organization. So if I'm thrown in on a team, usually because I'm a consultant, I've been hired by the CEO, then I show up and the team has, say there's 8 people on the team that I talk with on a daily basis. Those 8 people are going to have very different levels of actual support for design. They might do what the CEO tells them to, but in practice, they might do things that undermine the process. There might be structures of authority or approval that actually need to be taking place that might make the process a little bit more fraught. So ultimately, if that sounds like you and you're in-house in an organization and you want to do this kind of like undercover user experience design where you're acting sort of on the sly behind everybody's back, which is not a bad way of doing this. There is an entire excellent book on how to do this organizationally. I find the 3-step process is ask, do it anyway, and then ask again. And asking, you can just say, hey, I heard this amazing talk from Nick Disabato, right? And they're a cool, fancy designer. They talked at South by Southwest once and wrote 3 books and seem to be taken seriously. All right, here are some things that we could potentially do. And I think they will actually help our business out. Here's how I think they will actually help the business out. Make the case, right? Can't hurt to shoot your shot, right? And if they say yes, do it. And if they say no, do it, but quieter. You can probably still look at analytics if you have access to them. You can still run heat maps. Probably you've installed a heat mapping tool and nobody's actually looking at it in the first place. You can ask customers. You can even mine what exists out there already, surveys, other research, and do it alongside the rest of the things that you're doing. And then come back with that evidence and say, hey, I think something happened, and I think it might have happened for this reason. Can we try and do something about it? So that's what 3 is, right? You can ask again. Don't mulingly ask for research yet, right? Wait until you've got some impact, right? Go here, do some synthesis on your research, come up with some revenue generating design decisions, get a few wins, and then ask again, and then do it anyway. And ultimately, if you have that culturally as a value in the organization, people will start to follow you if you end up getting wins, right? I haven't seen a situation, unless it's done badly, where design executed well actually failed as a process because it's focused on the customer. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes the solutions, the things that we should do about it are really challenging, right? Like redoing the pricing structure, giving free 2-day shipping to all of our customers for $130 or whatever Amazon does, right? And then building a shipping network. Like that's their design synthesis. And that's insane for most people, right? So when you're doing this, you can look at easy sources, heat and scroll maps, analytics. Usually it's on the quant side of things. Maybe post-purchase surveys would be a good one, right? Run a usability test. You can do this without any authority. If you have your company's petty cash card, you can do it pretty easily. Expense it out. Recruit some people, give them gift cards, do whatever you need to be doing, mine customer reviews and support. All of these things can help improve design support in an organization because they help ground your decisions in what people are actually doing. It is usually hard for other people in the organization to argue against evidence, right? Now, they can argue against interpretations of that evidence, right? That's where things get interesting and can actually have nice sources of insight. But it's hard for them to argue against what you're seeing in Google Analytics or what you're seeing in your heat scroll maps, unless the data methods are actually wrong. But that is extremely rare, right? But ultimately, you work alongside other people. Everything is interconnected, and you want to make sure that you get people on board and actually get that sort of structural support in the organization. And so I found that doing things a little bit more quietly and using those things to get wins, and then using those wins to reflect back to the rest of the team, the economic value of what design is and can be, can actually help out a lot. So I'm going to close with a story from one of my absolute favorite humans in the tech industry who has not been very active lately, unfortunately. If anybody knows who this person is, I will be very pleasantly surprised. It is Kathy Sierra. She's one of the finest authors in like old school early computing. And in 2015, after a brief hiatus, she wrote a book about business called Badass. And everyone on this call, go and read Badass. It's amazing. There's a link to it here. You can read it in about an hour. And at one point in the book, this is a scan straight from the PDF of the book. And it says, which would you rather have a user feel? Which of these would be a better predictor of sustained success? And which of these feelings inspires more honest word of mouth? And you have to pick just one. And it's a guy at a table with his cool millennial friends, and he's saying either A, this product is awesome, B, this company is awesome, or C, this brand is awesome. So think for a moment about which one you would actually try and pick. All right. It's actually D, I'm awesome. So she writes, it's not about our product or company or brand. It's about how the user feels about us. And it's how the user feels about themselves in the context of whatever it is our product, service, cause helps them do and be, right? So I think it's about empowerment. Like, what are we doing as businesses to try and catalyze this sort of reaction, right? How are we helping people live better lives? Like, if we're just blindly posting about new features and throwing everything in a matrix, we're not really helping customers. We're helping ourselves. And that's selfish. I think customers can tell when something selfish ends up in their inbox. I think they can tell when they're doing something that isn't actually serving their needs. People are smart. And I think the truly wild thing is that the more we help customers, the more likely we are to help our own businesses in the process. So that's kind of a high level. There's a lot of ways we could go in the Q&A, but I wanted to kind of go through that talk about what it is the design process is and how it can help you out. And I'm very curious about specifically how we can help you guys out. So that is all I've got. Thank you guys so much for listening. I think we can move into Q&A now.
Sounds good. Yeah, if anybody has any questions, throw them in the chat, please. And while we're waiting for some questions to come in, Nick, you had mentioned about card sorting. So you had...
yeah, so...
What is that? And
okay, yeah, card sorting. I'll give a very high level summary of it because people haven't really heard it, and it's like honestly one of the most fun things that I can do in my job. So let's say you have, I'll actually go to a website, and I'm going to reshare my screen, and I'm going to hope to God that I can actually reshare my screen this time. All right.
Yeah, that's what
allow to share screen. Share this screen. All right. Can you guys see that? Okay, great. So this is B&H. You've probably heard of B&H before, right? So they sell tens of thousands of items of audiovisual equipment. How do they settle on these like 10 primary navigation items? Right? How do they settle when I go to photography? How do they settle on these 4? Cameras, lenses, drones, film cameras? How do they settle on that, right? Card sorting is the practice of coming up usually with navigation, but it can also be the organization of features. It can be the organization of data items in a database that shows up in like a widget on your product, right? And it's the process of making sense of all of that. So what you do is you try and devise what the categories look like. You can have either predefined categories, so you've already decided on these, or the first thing that you do is come up with the categories. You have every team member do that, and then you argue about it for a little while, politely, until you come up with this list, right? Then you have, let's say, 100 products that are randomly represented across the store, right? You could do this with all 10,000. It'd be a real long card sort, but you could do it, right? You want to place each one of those underneath one specific category. And you would be shocked if you get a team of 5 people to go through this exercise, how little overlap there would actually be. Like, yeah, there would be one under, like a camera would belong under photography. But, okay, why does this have drones? And then there's a separate item for drones. Right? Why did they just, and they did not settle on this lightly. B&H is one of the most optimized stores on the internet, right? So each card is an individual item, like a product, or it could be a data element, or it could be a label for something, right? But it's a way of categorizing things and building consensus around what that looks like. Donna Winter, I want to say. she wrote the book on this. Donna Spencer. She wrote like the authoritative book on card sorting. It's from Rosenfeld Media. It came out in 2009, which sounds like it's ancient, but again, this technique is pretty evergreen and can be used essentially anywhere. So, yeah, that's essentially what card sorting is. I see another question though. Yeah,
Yes.
Ivy. When designing.
Yes.
Sorry, go on. You can ask.
Yeah, so Ivy asks, when designing sales pages for an event, as an example, what's the best way to do A/B testing to make decisions on which page design is the most successful?
So a lot of this talk, I can answer this one of two ways. A lot of this talk was focused on coming up with the right ideas to A/B test, right? Because ultimately, like, yeah, I can give you the other answer, which is go in a tool like convert.com or Visual Website Optimizer, which is at VWO.com, or Google Optimize, which is being shut down in exactly 2 months. But the other two are good. They'll work out well for you, right? And basically you go in, those are called A/B testing frameworks, and they act as WYSIWYG tools and page redirect tests. If you're doing like an event, right, I would probably create like your control landing page and then a separate landing page that's hidden. And then you can do what's called a redirect test within that framework that allows 50% of the traffic to go over to the variant page. And then you're measuring clicks to checkout, maybe scroll depth, signups, average revenue per user. And that's all controlled within the framework, right? So my recommendation would be go to VWO.com and see how it can help you out, because it's a fairly straightforward process, right? But the reason that this talk was so heavy on the research and the other process elements was because I don't know how you're going to be making those changes, right? Or what actually is going to work for you. It could be an event. It could be, your marketing page for SaaS business. It could be anything. So yeah, my recommendation would be take a look at A/B testing tools and see what they can do to help you out. Make sure you have a minimum sample size to get signups. So like I would recommend something like, if it's an event, it would have to be probably a larger event to get A/B testing to work for you. So, think convention center filling and not necessarily like a private tech event that's 200 people. A/B testing won't move the needle for you significantly on that front. The research will, right? Because you'll be able to be more informed about what you're writing for the outcomes of that event, the testimonials of that event, the organization of the page, the usability of the page. Those things can definitely be captured through research. But if it's a smaller event that's not like, again, filling a convention center someplace, 5-digit head count, like I would recommend not running A/B tests on it. So.
Awesome. We got another question that popped in the chat while you were answering that question from Jane. Jane asks, what do you say to clients that are spooked about user testing with clients because they're worried those clients will have unrealistic expectations that their feedback will always result in the improvements they request?
I've rarely had that happen, actually. I think in B2B applications, it could possibly happen, right? So what I like to do is a lot of preparation ahead of the call. And that can happen. There's 2 major touch points you can do when you're getting somebody on an interview or a usability test. And it's the initial email. Hi there, I'm Nick Disabato. I'm a designer with XYZ Corporation, and we'd like to get you on a call to talk about your experience. And we're going to do what we can to try and incorporate everybody's feedback as fairly as possible. Right? And you can set up expectations that, like, we're here to listen, we're not here to act yet. And sometimes what you say may actually contradict what other people are saying, right? So if you ask me to do something and another customer asks me to do something completely different, we have to try and come up with either one of their solutions or a compromise that will make everyone mad, right? So in either case, I think there's a strong, incentive there to set up with them like, we're in listening mode and we're in research mode. You can tell them that we're in research mode and we're trying to understand what this is and act with a greater degree of humility. And hold space for what they want something for a very real reason, right? But those elements of entitlement, there's a lot of just emotion that needs to be held space for, right? And ultimately, it's not fully your responsibility to do that. Like, they have to understand that either they're going to feel entitled and weird or they're not, but you can, go to a certain degree on that and help set expectations.
Cool. Awesome. We got another question from Ivy. What is the best way to encourage customers or attendees of an event to fill out surveys? We have a very low response rate with our post-event surveys.
Yeah. So when I do interviews or usability tests, there's usually an economic incentive for the customer, right? So the participant. So I'll give people like a $50 gift card for an interview. With usability tests, there's usually it's usually passive participants, like they're recruited from a pool of non-customers. So that'll be like, they'll be paid like $50 per test or something like that. And they'll go through as if it were kind of Mechanical Turk. If you're thinking in terms of participants, you can enter them into a contest to win free passes to the next installation of the event. That could work, You can incentivize them for a specific gift or to enter a raffle for something. But ultimately, if it's literally just a survey that's like, we would love your feedback, like I don't know how you're incentivizing them right now, right? So if you're asking for the best way, probably it's give them free passes to the next installation of the event, right? Or it's, give you a sponsorship or something like that that's relatively low margin for you to actually execute on, but it's high reward for them. Beyond that, you can give, enter people into a contest to win something, or if you want the real one, it would be fill out this survey for 5% discount code off the next event. I don't know if that fits your event production company's margins, but that will probably increase response rate. You're never going to get a 100% response rate. Yeah, so free gift, something downloadable. Yeah, contest or discount code would be my idea there. So I think that pretty much answers that. Cool.
Sweet. Awesome. Well, I think that takes care of everything that was in the chat. Cool. Yeah. Well, Nick, hey, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining and giving your insight and great presentation.
Thank you. Thank you for soldiering through the technical difficulties. I sometimes just grunt my way through. I feel like a lot of the time it's a bad first impression because I use technology like I'm 85 years old most of the time. And so yeah, no, I thought that went great. And for the rest of you, if you want to find me on the internet, you can go to draft.nu. If you want a 160-page long dramatic reading of everything I just talked about, you go to draft.nu/value and buy a book called Value-Based Design. I have another book called Store Design coming out specifically for e-commerce in the next, I'll say 4 months. It's August. I want it to be released by the end of the year. We'll see what happens. And thank you again so much for your time. Very, very grateful. And let me know if you have any other questions. You can just email me through Go to Draft and ping me, and I'm always happy to help. So thanks.
Awesome, Nick. Well, you have a great rest of your day, and we will be sending out the replay here in the next day or two. And we'll go
awesome. Thank you so much.